Welcome everyone, my name is Tristan Claridge, and I'm the convener of this webinar series for the International Social Capital Association. The association's mission is to advance the research and application of the social capital concept, and the association is now welcoming new members. We're also holding a conference in Dubai next year, and everyone's welcome to come along and take part in the community. In this session, we welcome Joseph Kunnuji for a presentation titled Gbenopo as an expression of social capital and Badagry's Ogu music culture. Joseph is a senior lecturer in African music at the University of the Free State in Bloemfontein, South Africa. His doctoral research examined Ogu music as a marginalised practice in Lagos. His recent projects continue to explore lesser-known African musical practices. He is an associate editor with the Journal of Musical Arts in Africa and has published in the Yearbook for Traditional Music and Popular Music and Society, among others. We're delighted you've agreed to give this webinar. Welcome, Joe, and over to you for the presentation.
Yeah, thank you very much. Good morning from Bloemfontein, South Africa. And I'd like to say a massive thank you to Professor Tristan Claridge for the introduction and also the opportunity to be part of the amazing work that you're doing with this association. So I'll be speaking on the topic. I'm so sorry, it's a mouthful. Yeah, but I will be speaking on the topic Gbenopo as an expression of social capital in Badagry's Ogo musical culture. So as we continue, I will unpack what Gbenopo is and sort of describe how it fits into the concept or how it aligns with the concept of social capital. So to start with, I need to clarify that this presentation is based on my 2017 and 2018 doctoral fieldwork in Badagry. And Badagry is a Nigerian border town in Lagos State that connects on different sides to Porto Novo and Cotonou, the twin capital cities of the Benin Republic. And because of its geographical location, Badagry is sort of embedded within a translocal Ogu sociocultural formation that shapes everyday life across the international border. And my primary aim in this presentation is to draw on the contextual practice of Gbenopo, which is a concept of conviviality among the Ogu people, not just of Badagry, but more broadly Ogu people in West Africa, and to illustrate how social capital can be theorized within this post-colonial setting that's marked by political and economic precarity. So primarily, like these are some of the questions that I'll be asking myself or that I'll be speaking to in this presentation. So first and foremost, I assume that social capital is sort of ubiquitous, it's found everywhere. And, I also understand that there are different types of social capital. So my first question is, what type of social capital exists here, based on the work that various scholars have done? So what type of social capital exists in the context? Then how is it articulated among the people? How do they speak of it? As most of us might know, the terminologies that academics use are not necessarily the same terminologies that people who live within the communities that we study use. So the other question I'll be thinking through is, how is social capital articulated within this context? And thirdly, I want to see if there are similar concepts, particularly in this part of the world, or even more broadly in Africa. Are there similar concepts? I know that the one that's been sort of overused is Ubuntu, but today I will sort of step away from that and and sort of speak to what a scholar, a renowned scholar of anthropology, has conceptualized as the dual concept of incompleteness and conviviality. So I will quickly move on to Ogu musical culture as a regional formation. And first and foremost, I want to unpack or sort of speak to who Ogu people are. So, Ogu people emerged as an ethnic minority group in southwest Nigeria through the colonial delineation of Africa and are indigenous to parts of today's Lagos and Ogun State, both in Nigeria and, of course, beyond Nigeria. But I'm focusing here on sites where they are indigenous in Nigeria. Then Badagry is one of the sites in Lagos State that is home to Ogu people. In Badagry, Ogu people are nested within a cross-border cultural formation involving other Ogu communities in various parts of the Republic of Benin, Togo, and Ghana. And I use the term Ogu here as a cover term, similar to how we speak of Shona or Yoruba, to refer to a group of people who share closely related languages and a common history of origin in West Africa, and who today use the standardized Ogu language or Alada for everyday communication. So many among Badagry's Ogu people maintain ties with their ancestral homes in these other West African countries and sites, particularly the Republic of Benin. And within this region, identity markers include a shared language, fashion, belief system, values, ethos, and music, among many other things. So, among Ogu people, interdependence and conviviality are captured in the concept of Gbenopo. Gbenopo is derived from combining three words, ogbe, that is sounds or voices, no, that's the verb to be, po, meaning together. Hence, Gbenopo means the togetherness of voices, and it is more contextually interpreted as united voices or speaking as one. And interestingly, many of the groups that I spoke to or that I studied during my field work, many of them have Gbenopo as part of their vision statement. And in fact, some of them use it as their motto. The motto of this band is Gbenopo, that is coming together, united voices. So Gbenopo as a concept animates the interdependence necessary for the survival of individual and the collective, or what might be described in Inyamjo's word as conviviality. So to further demonstrate how Gbenopo works in Badagry, um, and more specifically within the regional Ogu musical culture, I'll take a look at two bands, Gogoke and Christy Tin. So, given that this is not a musicological presentation, I've tried to step aside from playing musical examples, but I collaborated with this band during my field work or during my doctoral studies, and I made extensive recordings of their performances. But I'll skip that today. So let's talk about the first band, Gogoke. So Gogoke is a male band that is made up of civil servants, artisans, and blue collar workers for whom music making provides both camaraderie and supplementary income. Beyond performance, the band also functions as a support network, embodying Gbenopo as a lived expression of conviviality in Badagry. The group emerged serendipitously when young men from the Igbogbile community, Igbogbile is part of Badagry, is in the western part of Badagry. So they began to play together at local celebrations. Since many community members could not afford to hire professional bands for birthday celebrations and other events, these men who all had other primary occupations outside of music, came together to feel this need. And thus, Gogoke was born in 2015. Um, so let me briefly also talk about Christy Teen. Christy Teen is the female counterpart of Gogoke, comprising women who often navigate multiple layers of hegemony, like talking about the fact that they are from a minority ethnic group, which already imposes a layer of hegemony, and the fact that there are women in this context, and many of them are not formally trained within the Western formal education structure. So that sort of makes them subjects of multiple layers of hegemony and dominance. So the band originated within the Igbo community in Badagry West, where women came together to form a thrift society. Each member contributed monthly, and the collected sum was given in turns to support individual projects, with the cycle continuing until every member had benefited. Over time, this collective group grew beyond financial support to include musical contributions at community events. The women began providing entertainment for occasions such as naming ceremonies for children born to their members, then transforming their thrift society into Christy Teen, a band that animates solidarity through music. So today, both Christy Teen and Go-Go Care bands primarily function as musical ensembles, performing at events beyond their immediate community. Yet, their core essence remains rooted in mutual support. When welcoming new members, trustworthiness and reliability are valued far more than musical skills. In the way these bands operate within Igbogbele, they sort of exemplify what Tristan Claridge called the bonding social capital, which is based on relationships grounded in shared values, interdependence, and strong internal ties. The um, the Ogu convivial concept of Gbenopo as social capital. So, like many concepts, social capital carries contested meanings, with some scholars even questioning the use of the word capital in this context. Amid this debate, I find Bandari and Yasunobu's contribution particularly useful. They identify the major elements of social capital as social networks, civic engagement, norms of reciprocity, and generalized trust. They further define it as that is, they define social capital as a collective asset in the form of shared norms, values, beliefs, trust, networks, social relationships, and institutions that facilitate cooperation and collective action for mutual benefit. So, building on this definition, I began asking what holds together. Like, I found this kind of the definition given by Bandari and Yasunobu 2029, I found it very, very much applicable, or I find that Gbenopo sort of aligns with it. But beyond just aligning, I started questioning that what exactly is the ingredient that holds together this Gbenopo, or the social capital that we're talking about. So I began asking what holds together the support and interdependence I observe among bands in Badagry. And eventually I came upon a compelling, a compelling phenomenon, and that is a shared belief system. And it is this shared belief system that I see grounds the community and sustain its social fabric. This belief system can be understood as the substructure of social capital in Badagry. Just to also add to that, this context that I'm describing is quite homogeneous on various registers, and talking about their belief system, you find that across generational divides, across different parts of society, there is like a strong belief that's anchored on sort of a mixture of the indigenous religion and the religion that have been introduced in that area. Could talk about Islam and Christianity, and this belief system is sort of structured. It's sort of like a syncretic belief system, even though the people in society might not articulate it this way, but it's sort of like a syncretic belief system that draws on indigenous values and beliefs and practices, as well as the religions that have been introduced. So there is like a general belief in the hereafter and a general belief in the sphere of justice being mediated by the supernatural. And if there is also a belief in when you in the practice of reciprocity, and that there is no action that goes unrewarded. So um that sort of came to the fore in my reasoning. So this became especially evident when, in the process of collaborating with bands, some members sought reassurance about my motives. They wanted to be sure that I had the right motive and I would not exploit them. So, given the power asymmetry between us, that is, myself as a researcher in a privileged position, and they with very minimal resources, and of course, functioning or operating within a weak legal framework. And even if the legal framework was not weak, they did not have the wherewithal to sort of challenge any of my actions, say sue me or anything like that. So their concerns were ultimately framed within the prevailing belief in the hereafter, the conviction that every action carries consequences, and that justice and fairness are safeguarded by tutelary deities who preside over the creative realm in which we worked. So it was clear to me then that the glue of this form of social capital rested in their shared belief system, which, echoing the source that holds together, or the kind of underlying principle behind Francis Nyamjo's dual concept of incompleteness and conviviality. So I'll move on to talk about incompleteness and conviviality. So the glue is the belief system I found. So now moving on to incompleteness and conviviality. Francis Nyamjo's work on incompleteness and conviviality center around the idea of the interconnectedness and interdependence of humans as essential for individual and collective beings or well-beings. This idea extends to social structures, civilizations, and the way humans relate to the material world. So Nyamjo cites Nyamjo cites the world depicted in Amos Tutuola's 1952 novel, The Palm Wine Drinkard, to explain this concept. It is a world of human limitations, fragility, and vulnerability, which make a person or system require the support of other equally incomplete persons or systems. The worldview depicted in this novel is ill-suited for arrogance and a sense of grandeur that could potentially result in tyranny or high-handedness. Inyamjo clarifies that the incompleteness of individuals and more broadly cultures and civilizations is the norm or the natural order of things. Hence, we embrace our incompleteness and seek conviviality to make up for it. Even in convivial context, the aim is not for individuals to be complete. Rather, embracing incompleteness is a way of strengthening community, which ensures collective survival and inclusivity. To Nyamjo, the idea of cultural purity or self-sufficiency is delusional. For every person has borrowed and continues to do so. So, Inyamjo, who is a professor at the University of Cape Town, usually uses this illustration of a skull a skull who went around borrowing body parts and at the end of the day became a very handsome man. And he went to town, wooed a lady, and never acknowledged anyone for the success. He basically just attributed everything to his own skills and competences. And then everybody who had borrowed him something returned to collect what they had borrowed, and he returned to a skull. And of course, the lady ran off because of that. So that is something that sort of illustrates the idea that every system, every society, every individual, every civilization has borrowed. And one musical example is today we speak of the Baroque era, like in Western art music, we speak of dances like the saraband, but the saraband dance itself originated from Egypt. So that is something that illustrates that even the Western civilization has so much that it has borrowed from other civilizations that existed before or that came before it. So in Inyamjo's words, incompleteness touches on all aspects of being and becoming at the individual and collective levels and applies to humans and their relationships with other humans. Its dimensions include relatedness, openness, enrichment, humility, and action. It is predisposed to and predisposes myriad interconnections, embeddedness, and inextricably entangled. The concept of incompleteness invites openness and reaching out across borders, exploring alternatives and building bridges as a mode of inclusionary existence. End of quote. In Tutuola's world, the boundaries between the spiritual and terrestrial world or the physical and supernatural realms blur, and individuals freely move between these spheres. Accordingly, humans' survival hinges on embracing the unknown and unknowable and being open minded and flexible to various ideas and activities beyond one's control. So, in my reading of Ogu musical culture in Badagry, Gbenopo as a social capital resonates with the concept of incompleteness and conviviality. So, it's not something to be ashamed of the idea of being dependent on others. And in fact, in Inyamjo's idea, like you cannot, it's not something, it's not embracing or depending on others, it's not a ploy to become complete yourself. So incompleteness is perpetual and it's something that's it's the natural order of things and we all need it. And coming back to the idea of Gbenopo, within this context, it's a context which I will describe a bit more in detail shortly, but it's a context that requires one to be dependent on others. It's a context that really, really animates the idea of social capital, especially the bonding social capital as described by Tristan. So the nature of Gbenopo as social capital. So here is where I really talk about this context and why Gbenopo is non-negotiable. So to return to the case study community, Igbogbele is a rural community with minimal infrastructure. Uh, the continuous emigration of upwardly mobile, tertiary educated youth, with that, peasantry pervades and utilities like the internet, which could connect individuals to the rest of the world, are not feasible options for many. So, it's this is one of the things I tell people when people say, "Oh, the world is becoming global," or some things are like universal today, some things are global. There are still several people that are excluded in the globalizing trend. And Igbogbele happens to be one of those sites where many people still cannot access the internet. So children, as I found, play with their own invented toys, and economic deprivation may be seen in almost every sphere of life. These, coupled with the absence of a social security system in Nigeria, compel the continuity of interdependence and reciprocity in Igbogbele. In extreme cases of ill health or the loss of loved ones and other situations requiring funds beyond personal earnings, friends, neighbors, and colleagues within the community often pool resources together to meet an individual's need, whether through individual donations made directly to the one in need or collective contribution facilitated through a social group to which the individual belongs. The community continues to serve as a support system. Such assistance is offered in good faith and with the expectation that the one whose needs are being addressed will reciprocate the gesture as friends require help in future. Where the needed funds are beyond the means of friends, a more affluent member of the community, or perhaps one who is no longer resident in Igbogbele, may be contacted to assist, as it is common for community members to present financial gifts to host on celebratory occasions and other events. Such events would include childbirth, the funeral of one's parent, or the wedding of one's child. So, in this sense, individuals survive difficult situations and those requiring funds that are beyond personal earnings through social capital. And this practice of supporting one another forms part of the communal ethos. And with this expression of Gbenopo, ensured both collective and individual well-being. So this expression of Gbenopo has continued to ensure collective and individual well-being, despite meager personal earnings in most cases. So in this sense, Gbenopo may be seen as a survival strategy in today's Badagry, as it sustains the social fabric through a collective conscience. Again, that collective conscience is built based on a shared belief system. Individuals survive and thrive mainly through the support of other individuals or belonging to a support group in Igbogbele. Gbenopo lived conviviality thus seems mandatory and not optional. So often when people earn, such earnings are usually it's quite rare for you to find people who have earnings that are solely for them and their families. So in one way or the other, people get to contribute to the social fabric and support other people, and they do this with the mind that others would also support them when they are in need. So there is that reciprocity that's lived among the people and obviously among the music ensembles in Gbogbele. So I'll move on to my closing remark, and then maybe we can have discussions and maybe contributions from everyone that's been listening. So what is really fascinating in this case study is the resilience and the agency displayed by quote and unquote disenfranchised groups. In some African contexts, social capital provides an important lens for understanding how groups and individuals navigate the precarity of post-colonial life in the absence of formal social security systems. At the heart of this form of social capital lies a deeply rooted belief system without which the center would not hold. In Badagry, the outcomes of social capital are consistently connected to this shared belief system, which mirrors the dynamics found in many bonding social capital settings. Yet, as society becomes increasingly heterogeneous, complex, and individualized, this model of social capital in Badagry may evolve, potentially giving way to forms of bridging social capital. But for now, Gbenopo has lived form of bonding social capital remains a vital and workable strategy for sustaining community life in Badagry. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thanks, Joe. It's a fascinating presentation, and it's really interesting to hear about how social capital is being applied and used in that particular context, and how, I guess, music is the vehicle or the symbol for how that social capital can really be crystallized in the way in which people experience it. So we'll take some questions and discussion, and feel free to either raise your hand within Zoom, which you'll find under the React button, or alternatively, you can post in the chat. I'll happily read out the question on your behalf if you're not in a position to read it yourself, or you can unmute yourself when called upon, and you can ask the question yourself. So there is a question immediately in the chat. So this is from and Adanini, who says, Badagry is a symbolic aspect, point of no return, of the slave trade and the colonial rule in Nigeria. Did you find out what happened to the Gbenopo people during the colonial rule and the slave trade?
Thank you very much for that beautiful question. So, yeah, Badagry is one of those sites where slaves were exported, and one of its markets was quite central in pre-colonial slave trade. But I must clarify that the activities of that period was way beyond the control of the locals. This is not to exonerate anyone, but the activities of that period included um, non-Africans first and foremost, and also other Africans from interland. So Badagry just has happened to be the border, or the Atlantic shore from where slaves were exported. It is not to say that every slave that went across or departed the shores of Africa was from Badagry. So I think the idea of Gbenopo applies mainly to the local the local scene, and the activities, the slave trade activities were way beyond that local scene. And another thing that I would like to say in response to that is that, this obviously is from my field work, which is quite recent. And I think the focus of my presentation is to see how it is lived today, how Gbenopo is expressed today, rather than historically. So thank you very much. I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, thanks for the question, Adani. And feel free to either unmute yourself or add anything else if you want to in the chat as a follow-up, and I'd be happy to read it out. Because I think what we see in a lot of parts of the world is that there can be very powerful historic influence on the nature of social capital in a particular community. Talking with people in Brazil, for example, the ongoing impact of colonialism from a long time ago is continuing to exert impact on the way in which people have those shared belief systems, the way in which they see others. And there can be sometimes a description of, low levels of social trust, for example, that has very, very old historic roots. And similarly, the research I did in Guernsey in the Channel Islands also found, historic roots going back to World War II, 80 years ago, that is still continuing to have a very powerful influence on the way in which people relate to each other. So I think it's a very interesting question to pose that given the nature of the slave trade and what was happening in that particular region, what kind of lasting legacy there may be there, if any, maybe none, but whether or not there's any ongoing impact on the nature of that shared belief system that exists within that community.
Yeah, do you want me to respond to that?
Well, perhaps not the focus of your research exactly, but I guess the question is whether or not you were picking up on any kind of historic influence on the nature of the social capital in that region.
Yeah. Actually, this is not to like mythologize the past, especially when it comes to the idea of communal living. Um, I think today people have just generally, like, especially like within the context where I've studied, people have just generally found it's sort of like agency. They found what works. So it's not necessarily them coming together to say, "Oh, let's retain this aspect of our culture or our heritage." It's more a thing of you are in a society without a social security system. People have needs, and sometimes, people even need capital. Someone's child has just been admitted into the university. How do they go about it? Often it's like leveraging their their community, leveraging the kind of structures that already exist. And when people give, it's usually with the mind that at some point others might need to reciprocate. And you find the cases of people who are quite affluent who don't need people to reciprocate, but they give with the mind of it's almost like a sense of responsibility. This is something I need to do to keep the society going. And some of them, in fact, like if you found someone who's like wealthy or affluent who does not help anyone, such people have they're usually they're usually sort of like stigmatized in society that this is not a good person, this is a terrible person, just because the person has not been very supportive or contributing to helping others. So it's sort of like a strategy that people have sort of come up with to survive the precarity of post-colonial living.
Yeah. So I guess there is some historic influence there, but people are living in the moment and not necessarily thinking about and dwelling on the past, just simply addressing, the needs of the day. And so I think along the same kind of lines, exploring in many cross-border areas, the existence of the border creates some sort of a divide between people, where some people say, well, you're part of the other side and therefore you're not quite one of us. But that doesn't seem to be the
Mhm.
case, particularly in this region. It sounds like the shared culture, the shared language, there's a very strong shared identity there. But is
Mm.
there any sense that the border actually creates some division within the community?
Yeah, I'd say that for the people, like for the two countries, obviously the border means a lot, but people who operate there, you find people kind of carrying out economic activities across the border. Despite like there is obviously like some level of smuggling and all of that and illicit activities, economic activities, but for the people, the border means very little. It's the same culture, even though you find that
Right.
due to French and English, French influence in Benin Republic and English influence in Nigeria, the orthography of the same language is sort of different. Like the people in Benin Republic, for instance, will spell Zinzu, which is but an Ogu name, as Zinsou, whereas the ones in Badagry will spell it as Zinsu. The same name, same pronunciation, same meaning, yeah, but because of the influence of French and influence of English, they sort of have slightly different orthographies. But beyond that, the people are sort of the same. I said also in my presentation that it's typical to find people from Badagry who still maintain ancestral a connection with their ancestral home in Benin Republic, and they visit from time to time if there is a need to, like if there's a celebration or someone has just died or something. So the border the border on that part of Africa is quite arbitrary, I must say. The culture is largely the same, but of course for the government it means a lot because they want to have earnings on things that go across the board. Yeah, but for the people, especially those the locals, you find you find that the border does not mean so much.
Yeah, great. There's another question in the chat. Bourdieu's theory of practice used social capital as one of the concepts to understand power dynamics. So did you think that Gbenopo people use this concept to control power and resources to manage their lives?
Like, I'll clearly say here that again, the people who leave Gbenopo do not actively think about, we're going to use this concept to control. Or, we as academics, we tend to theorize what we see. But for the people, it's their lived reality. And of course, it's not to say that they don't have the ability to theorize, but the way that they go about their lives is not necessarily, they're not necessarily thinking about using Gbenopo or a concept to do one thing or the other. It's just a lived reality for them, and I sort of see it as an expression. In fact, I came across even expressions of this concept even in their music. You find a lot of interlocking patterns that are played by different individuals, and for me, that sort of animates this interdependence that I spoke about in my presentation. So it's you find we can sort of look at it and see traces and see, okay, this is what's going on here and sort of theorize. But I wouldn't say that the people use Gbenopo as a concept to control power. It's just a thing of unity. We want to be united. They use it as a motto for their bands and things like that. For their ensembles, they use they sort of push the idea of interdependence and united voices and things like that. But beyond that, I wouldn't say that they consciously use it to control power or resources. It's just something deployed to make everyone survive, to keep everyone afloat, especially given the precarity of post-colonial living. And you'd even find that it sort of comes more to the fore when you look at the absence of governance in this part of the country, like infrastructural decay and all of that. So instead of, because they're quite peripheral, even geographically, they're not in a place that's accessible to the capital city. So it's more like looking for local solutions. So they wouldn't necessarily say, "Hey, Gbenopo, let's go and do," but let's just leave. And what's like the path of least resistance here? Like, we don't have this. How do we cater to this need? It's through synergy. Let's come together. Let's build together, and we can sort of look at that and theorize it. But the people themselves may not necessarily be doing that every day.
Yeah, sure thing. And I wanted to explore a bit more because you talked about the shared belief system really lying at the heart of social capital. And that's really quite different than the definition of social capital. But you can see how the shared belief system actually has all of the characteristics of capital. It's something that people can invest in, that you build up over time. It represents a stock that, people get to know the shared beliefs, and that provides the foundation for being able to help each other and for share information and all of those flows. I'm deliberately using capital type terms like stock and flow, but we can see how the shared belief system in many ways really is the social capital that we're talking about. And yet it doesn't seem to align very well with many of the academic definitions that tends to talk about, norms and institutions and networks and these kinds of things, which I guess in many ways are more like indicators or proxies of the existence of those shared beliefs. But it seems from the way you were describing it that maybe the shared beliefs are the actual capital. So interested in your
Yeah.
thoughts on that and how you're navigating the literature through your research and how you're finding the definitions and the conceptualizations and all of that as you navigate and understand the research context, which is clearly very rich, and yet you're having to put academic concepts to it. So interested in your thoughts and experience with that.
Yeah, thanks. So, I sort of came upon this idea of shared belief as being the glue, like I called it in that presentation. Um, During one of my conversations with the band, I collaborated with this band because they had a number of original compositions that I thought they would benefit from me recontextualizing and producing for them, which I did. So during the process, being someone who's sort of new to them, they were not total, like there were a few of them who were open to collaborating, and whereas there were a few of them, like I would go for their meetings and I would observe that one or two people would not talk, like they would be so quiet. And I was a bit worried, and we had a meeting, and it was during that meeting that I realized that they there was a recourse all the time. Like whenever they spoke, they recourse to the tutelary deity in charge of creative arts. They would say, if you have any ulterior motive, uh, this deity will. So there was that strong belief in the potency of that deity to safeguard their interest. And the thing sort of inspired an epiphany for me to say that, okay, if this was missing, most likely people would be able to like do anything and get away with it. But because they believed that if you did something that was not benign, something that was not in the good interest of all, you will be like, it will catch up with you. Just like in the case of Amos Tutuola's palm wine drink card, a world in which the spiritual or the metaphysical has so much influence, and you'd even find, like with the band I collaborated with, they would not take credit for composing their own music. For instance, like somebody would write a song and they'll say, no, this song was given to me, or this song was inspired. So basically, there is this very strong rootedness in this belief system in the supernatural, and the the idea that the supernatural governs the activities of humans. And for them, they wouldn't say, I'll arrest you, or I'll call the police, or I will sue you, because again, the legal framework is not as strong in that part. And even if it was, they often do not have the wherewithal. They don't have the resources, the financial resources, and the connection to sue. So there was just this reliance, and they really rely, like they rely on this belief system so much that they would believe that, like, you can't cheat me, you cannot, like, it's just not possible. Something will happen, and then you justice will be served. So that I found. And for me, I didn't find that kind of explanation in the articles that I read on social capital. I must say that you did an amazing job, like trying to bring all of these voices together and trying to trace. Like there was this article that you wrote where you looked at Bourdieu's work, and you looked at all of the people, and you sort of said, I think there was a particular scholar that stood out that many people were citing, and that seemed to be like the working definition of social capital. But in my research, I did not find so much of. I found that whatever it is that held people together, that whatever it is that sustained social capital, it was centered around this idea that there is the spiritual governing the physical, and whatever we do as humans will have consequences, whether good or bad. So that belief system, and again, like towards the end of the paper, I mentioned that um, I envision that as society changes, even though like this area is still very, like, there's so much that's still preserved, but as you begin to have the plurality of thought, and some of these things might be challenged, and maybe people will realize, okay, maybe I can do this, and there might not be an immediate consequence. But even for this, the people that I've studied, the consequence might not even be immediate, but they believe that there will always be consequence for every action. So I and that's why I use that expression, that the glue for social capital in this context is the belief system.
Yeah. So I wasn't thinking necessarily that the beliefs would be so specific as the way that you've described them. I was thinking more a generalized belief system that people agree with on a in a general sense. But I can see how, the way you're describing how that really important core belief system might decay over time as people become more individualistic or lose that faith in perhaps the importance of those beliefs. But at the same time, I can see also how those beliefs would be so intertwined into everyday practices that they would persist and there'd be some resilience to them. But certainly, I guess the risk and the concern we have, I think, in a lot of places around the world is that things may change for the worse if we don't maintain those kind of shared belief systems, whatever they may be. And the way you describe, and I haven't seen it framed exactly this way before, and it's really intriguing the way you describe the incompleteness and the conviviality, because that really implies what is required to build strong social capital, which
Mm,
is, an acknowledgement that we're not completely self-reliant, an acknowledgement that we're not completely whole on our own and we actually need others and we do better together with others. And that kind of curiosity and outward looking approach that wants to know about others and wants to be a part of things with others. And that kind of attitude, I tend to use the word regard when I'm talking about, I think, what is mostly the same thing, because regard implies respect of others as well as an interest in others. But that
mm.
incompleteness and conviviality, I think, is perhaps in many ways a much stronger way of thinking about it, because it really gets to the heart of what it means to be human and why we form groups and why we want to be part of something and work together with others. So I think there's no question there, but I think it's a really useful framing and way of thinking about it that's clearly relevant for the particular research context that you're working in.
Yeah, Nyam just done is written extensively about the duo incompleteness as the natural order, and then the panacea for it is conviviality, in which case incompleteness is something to be embraced. And I've also like I'm also working currently on a project where we we are pushing the idea of um of collaborative I'm trying to remember what we called it, but it's the idea of pooling resources and competences. And we're working on a project that's multilingual. Um, Gerald Kubik, an ethnomusicology from from Germany, going to a site in southwest Nigeria, collected data in Yoruba, like the recordings are in Yoruba, and he wrote his protocol in German. So for us to do justice to this archive, you need someone who is adept, who can speak, who is fluent in German. And I'm someone fluent in Yoruba. And we realized that a single researcher won't be able to do justice to this archive. So Liam Joy again calls that um I know it will come to me, but something around collaboration. It's something around collaboration, convivial scholarship, sorry.
Right.
So
Yeah.
he calls that convivial scholarship. And this idea of conviviality is we all live it, but sometimes we don't acknowledge it. Whether in the orchestra, for instance, everybody's tuning. It's sort of interdependent. So your tuning is relative to the tuning of the next person who takes the tuning from. So there's that's the way to survive. And there is no one who's got it all. You can only offer your own, like you can only make your contribution and others make their contribution and in settings of conviviality. And that's what makes society run.
Yeah, precisely. And it's an awareness of that then emphasizes the importance of social capital. It emphasizes the importance of those shared belief systems
Yeah.
and conviviality. And so, yeah, it's a really nice play between those two dynamics that really emphasizes what's going on. So I'm aware that I've
Yeah.
been really dominating the Q&A. Other participants who are here, feel free to get your questions in, either raise your hand or post something in the chat. I've got a feeling we might be running towards the end of the session, so do get your questions in soon if you have any. Aminal, did you have a question or just want to say hello?
Thank you very much, Dr. Joseph. Your nice presentation.
Thank you.
May I know about Christine?
May you know about what?
Christine. Christine. You
I didn't
mentioned
get.
singer Christine.
Oh yeah,
Yes.
Christine. That's the female band from Igbogbele. They sort of have the same values and beliefs and ways of operating as Gogoke. Gogoke is the male band, the female band, and is the band that started as a thrift society. In fact, it did not start as a music ensemble. It started as a thrift society, like a social support group. And these women, most of them who have been subject of multi-layered dominance, male dominance, Yoruba dominance, and all kinds of even dominance from women who are educated. They sort of came together to solve their own issues. And, that band has actually displayed so much agency. For instance, the instruments that they play with are made from everyday silent materials in kitchen. Plates, they take plates and then they affix rings and then they play with that. It makes the sound of a shaker. They hit it against their palms and then they shake it as well. So that's like agency, like it's creative agency, and they make their own instrument. They play with this instrument. They work. They serve as a support group. Their primary motivation for playing music is not to make earnings. Is to support. Okay, there is this person's naming ceremony happening. We will be there. We will play music and just have fun. Like it's usually sufficient for you to just entertain them, like give them refreshment. They don't ask for money often. So it's a way of like meeting a need and serving to sort of support their members. And today it's gone beyond just their members. Today, outside of the group, they also they charge a fee, but usually very, very minimal. If you understand the economics, like a band, say, let me just use the example of, say, if a band will charge $10, this Christy Teen band will ask you to bring like $1. So it's something that they do just to support. And in fact, the name Gogoke, Christy Teen translates as, like you see the influence of Christianity. So it means Christ exists. Gogoke means honor. So the idea of honoring people, like going to perform for them, is what led to the emergence of Gogoke. And Christian, on the other hand, started as a group where people contribute money, and then the lump sum is taken by someone to execute a project. Next month is someone else who takes and the end of the circle is, when everybody has had a turn. So these are just like local strategies of coping, of surviving. And it's almost like Lagos goes on its own trajectory, like it's busy and it's a mega city. And these people are quite peripheral, but they have their own way of surviving, and they must you must not imagine them as people who are like sad and deprived and go about moody, thinking that they've been excluded from the capitalist economy. Like, they are happy people. They just go about their lives. They have local solutions to their issues, and even though they may not necessarily be they may not be like in our own terms, like wealthy or have all the resources that they need, because sometimes they are forced, like a child needs to go to school and all that. So they are sort of like forcibly integrated into the capitalist system, but they have their own ways of like surviving and getting by and living happily and making things happen for themselves. So again, everything is sort of centered on that core, the core of, shared belief in the need for reciprocity and all that.
Thank you very much for your nice explanation.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
All right. Are there any other questions? Feel free to get them in quickly if you have any other questions. But Joe, like just reflecting, while we see if there's any final questions, just reflecting on that idea about language and how important it is to speak the language. Earlier today, I was actually trying to figure out why it is. 25 years I've been thinking about it, but why is it that Bourdieu defined social capital as actual and potential resources? And so I actually went back to his original French publication and looked at what the words were in French that were translated into actual. And what I found was that a more accurate translation is probably a word in English like current rather than actual. And so even the way in which words are translated can significantly change the meaning of what people are talking about. And so I think that speaks to that challenge you were talking about of collecting data in one language and then writing about it in another language and then potentially trying to read about it in a third language again, and how much might be lost or modified, I guess, in those processes, which can be quite challenging.
Yeah, I totally agree. I totally agree. And that's where convivial scholarship again comes to play. Like we should not try to make sense of any concept or any idea outside of the speakers of the language, people who know. Because sometimes you find that what things mean literally are not the exact implication within the context of use. So, for instance, for this study that I mentioned, one of the concepts that we came upon was agbajowo. Agbajowo is a Yoruba concept, and agbajo just means synergy. It means bringing together of. And if you say owo, it means hands. So, and there is a saying that agbajowo lafin soya, that is, you beat your chest with the bringing together of hands. That doesn't make sense. Like, how many people need to bring together their hands to for you to beat your chest? So it was on further probing and reading that I found that somebody had translated it as you beat your chest with a clenched fist. So if you think of owo as hands, you get it wrong there. So it's owo as, like, if you think of it as hands, but it can also be hand, like one person's hand, and then owo can be, even though these are fingers, you can also still refer, so you clench them to beat your chest. So again, just to sort of underscore the idea that conviviality or convivial scholarship is non-negotiable, is the way to live. It's the natural order of things. It's not something like, there's no one who can, yeah, something like the anecdote by Nyamjo that I referred to. There is no one like you by yourself, you're just a skull. You don't you have you need a hand, you need legs, you need eyes, you need every other person's contribution. And yeah, so I know that a lot of people just cite it when it's convenient. People say it takes a village to raise a child, but I am not sure the extent to which we practice this. Even in our publications, I'm going to publish this now and write Joe Kunnuji, author Joseph Kunnuji. Whereas the contribution of a community, literal community, Gogoke, Christine, they've contributed to this knowledge. And in fact, there are ways of seeing things that I've actually just written that are actually their ways. One of the questions I asked them was, how do they conceptualize musical form? I tried to explain, form. And they explained to me that, being people who live close to the Atlantic shore, they didn't say this was the reason, but I made that connection. The way they think of music is they think of music like waves. Waves build gradually, like musical form. Waves build gradually and then culminate somewhere. So when they start playing, they start all the time with a single bell pattern. And the shaker joins, this joins, that drums. And usually when they get to the highest point of the dance break, everybody cuts out again, and it's the bell again and maybe a few shakers. So that's like a wave, like the end of the wave, and then it starts again, the build again. So you can imagine that kind of knowledge that's resident in this community, very small community that, I would probably have just written off, and I would have said, no, it's Beethoven and Mozart and all the people who have written about music. They are the ones who are qualified to theorize about music. But these are people who are theorizing about music daily. So again, Agbajowo or conviviality is not negotiable. Like, we need that knowledge system. And I think we should advocate for me publishing and listing all the members of the community if possible, or just acknowledging that community, not in a footnote, but as co-authors, people who are collaborators, who are equal collaborators without that hierarchy of, this is professor this or doctor that, and then collaborating with the people. Those people in their own right are professors and doctors, but it's the problem of the system that we've inherited. And I think social capital should actually be driving us towards that kind of conversation, to say that social capital is non-negotiable and everyone's voice is important, and we need to acknowledge those contributions.
Oh, that's fantastic. What a wonderful way to finish. So, Joe, thanks very much for taking the time and effort to prepare and to give this webinar. On behalf of all of the members of the association, we greatly appreciate it, and thank you very much for it.
Thank you very much for having me. It's such a pleasure.
And everyone, feel free to tune in to our webinar series. We've got a fantastic series of webinars coming up over the next few weeks. So check our website for further details. And of course, we have our conference coming up in Dubai in March of 2026. We'd love to see you there if you can, to find out more about social capital and present work and build a community, and of course, build social capital with other social capital researchers and policymakers as well. Thanks, everyone. Look forward to next time.
Thank you very much, and bye.